So good evening, everybody, to the first inaugural Apiculture Online. We appreciate everybody attending. The first topic that we're going to be covering this evening is bees in season. So in other words, kind of what are your bees doing right now? What are they doing biologically at this time of year, this being April 22nd, 2020? And then what should you be doing as a beekeeper in response to what the bees are doing? So if you, unless you've been living under a rock or you haven't been paying attention, this was probably the earliest spring, one of the milder winters and one of the earliest springs that we've had in the last several decades. So an early spring means that the bees start brooding up much earlier in the season. Brooding up earlier in the season allows them to build up their populations to the point where they can swarm very early. And in fact, Jennifer, correct me, we caught our very first swarm this year on March 1st, which is a record. Is that correct, Jen?
That is correct.
That is correct. March 1st. So that's a new record. Our previous record, I believe, was something like March 14th or March 15th, which is my wife's birthday.
13th, but yes.
13th, okay. Well, so the fact is that the bees are very much in swarming mode right now. And so that's something that has been precipitated by that early spring. So what you need to be doing as a beekeeper is trying to stay ahead of your bees as best you can. You want to super them with additional brood boxes and or honey supers so that the colony can expand into that. You want to reverse those brood boxes so that they can take advantage of any unused or empty space so that they don't feel so congested, which is, of course, what prompts the bees to want to swarm and split in half. Kind of an advanced beekeeping technique, one that's very effective for swarm control, is known as checkerboarding. So checkerboarding is where you actually physically remove some of the frames in the middle of the brood nest and replace it with a foundation or empty comb or something to really break up that congestion in there so that the bees don't feel so quite as crowded and then therefore want to leave. And then finally, one of the things that you can do to prevent swarming, one of the best things that you can do, is to split the bees yourself, right? So you can take a strong hive that's about to swarm, and rather than half of them ending up in the trees, you can just split the boxes in half, and now you have two colonies. Of course, the problem with that is that one of those splits gets the queen, the other split is queenless because there's only one queen per colony. And so this makes it really important that you have a ready supply of queens on hand. So get the queens wherever you can get them. The problem with queens, though, is that everybody wants them right now, and the supply is always way, way, way smaller than the demand. So it can be really difficult to secure queens, especially if you need one in an emergency. So joining up with your club, joining up with other people who are raising queens locally is usually the best way that you can try and secure a queen when you're making splits or when you're kind of in swarm control mode. One last thing that I think is a good idea this time of year is that we're constantly getting calls at NC State, and I'm sure most beekeeping clubs around the state are doing the same, getting swarm calls. Swarms in trees, swarms moving into structures, so on and so forth. And so it's really imperative for your club and or your extension agent to have an updated list of the number of the people who are willing, able, and timely going out and getting swarms. Because to us, they're free bees if you're able to capture them. But once they've moved into structures, they can be really, really difficult to remove. And most beekeepers who aren't themselves contractors in some way are pretty reluctant to remove bees from structures. But both of those groups of individuals, those willing to capture swarms and those willing to do removals, those lists at the local level really need to be curated and updated so that we can help service our industry and make ourselves look good. Another thing that you should be doing right now is that we're right in the main part of the main nectar flow of the year. Again, because of the early spring, it's been very early with the nectar flow. And so you want to be supering and putting those extra boxes on top so that you can capture the nectar flow as it's coming in. Don't wait on that, because normally you do it in the end of April. No, this year it's a lot earlier, so make sure you stay on top of that. One last thing too that's going on inside your colonies associated with swarming is that the bees are raising queens. This is the time of year that they do it, usually in conjunction with swarming. So there's a lot of queens being made, and therefore there's a lot of mating going on with drones. And so even though you might be successful in not having your colonies swarm, your neighbors might not be in that same position. And so they have a lot of virgin queens in the area that need drones to mate with them. And of course, the queens don't mate with the drones inside their own hive, because that's mating with their brothers, and that's just wrong universally. And so their queens need to mate with your drones. So don't cull your drone comb, or don't get rid of those drones. They're very important this time of year, even though they actually don't perform any work for the colony other than mating with your neighbor's queens. So be a good citizen and let those drones do their thing. Now, one other thing that really makes a good beekeeper a very effective beekeeper is always looking ahead 1 to 2 brood cycles from right now. And so a brood cycle is, the time that a queen lays an egg to the time that that worker hatches, which is exactly 3 weeks. So if you're thinking ahead 3 to 6 weeks from now, 1 to 2 brood cycles from now, that's where the bees are going. And so that is what you want to be thinking and setting them up for success 1 to 2 brood cycles from now. So looking ahead 3 to 6 weeks, the nectar flow should be winding down. It probably won't be over until, I don't know, the end of May, something like that, at least in the lower parts of North Carolina. But the main nectar flow is going on right now. So you want to be supering right now, and you want to stay on top of it for the next month or so. If you've made splits, if you've started new colonies, if the colony swarmed on you and you're trying to recoup, allow for that brood nest expansion to keep going. Allow them, more space, giving them more boxes, rearranging the frames so that they can constantly be moving up in the brood nest, and the queen can keep laying at her maximum capacity. I should say that during this, the nectar flow and during the spring, this is the best time, the perfect time of year to cull old frames and draw out new foundation into brand new comb. So something that I think we as beekeepers could do a lot better job at is to get rid of those old brown and black combs and recycle them out, move them out to the outer part of the boxes, let all the brood hatch out, let them eat all of the honey from there, and then remove those and replace them with foundation right in the middle of the brood nest, so that they're really compelled to draw that out with fresh new wax. And then that keeps the pesticides and parasites and other things from building up in that old yucky comb. Get rid of that, give them some fresh new stuff, and the bees will overall do a lot better. So that's things that you can be thinking of right now, and what your bees are doing and what you can be doing as a beekeeper. So we'll move on to our second segment, which is kind of a bi-weekly timely topic. And so for this inaugural session, we'll start out with something that couldn't be more timely, and that is this topic of 5 things that you can do with beekeeping during this time of social distancing. I guess maybe 6 things. The number 0 is doing what you're doing right now, which is joining us online and remaining a part of the community through Zoom and other platforms so that we can continue to talk about beekeeping. But here are just some ideas of some of the things that you could be doing with your time, and hopefully with lots of ample time, as long as you're remaining safe and secluded. So the first thing is tend to your bees. The bees don't care that we're in social lockdown, right? They don't even know, and they could care less. And as long as you're alone, you're beekeeping alone, and you're not beekeeping in a group, or you're not, you're maintaining the context of the social distancing, you can still manage your hives. So get out there. Your bees still need you. It's a great excuse to get outside, and it's something that the bees won't care one bit. You'll get some fresh air. You'll be able to get out of the house. It's a good excuse to go visit your bees. Case in point, too, is that recall that honeybees have lots of different viruses that make them sick, but none of those viruses make us sick, and they can't get the coronavirus. They don't even have any coronaviruses in their biology, so they can't be an intermediate host. They can't get us sick. We can't get them sick. So don't worry about social distancing from your bees. Go and tend to them as you normally might, as long as you're maintaining the rules of social distancing and doing it yourself without taking any undue risks. A second thing that you can be doing is to maintain any mentor-mentee relationships that you might have as part of your club or in beekeeping in general. This period of social distancing doesn't mean the same thing as virtual distancing, as we're showing here this evening through this platform. You'll still be able to interact with others in your bee club or others that you have been working with. And so go out of your way to try to link up with your mentor or mentee in real time. And the development of the smartphones and these video chat platforms that we have on the smartphones can really make things very amenable to working a hive together virtually, right? So as a mentee is going through their hive, the mentor can literally be there watching them as they're holding their phone. Now, it might be a little tricky in the sense that you don't have three hands, one to hold the phone and two to hold the frames. But with a little bit of practice and forethought, there may be real opportunities here to continue to work with each other virtually and therefore safely. Either way, if you can't do it kind of in hive, you can still check in fairly regularly with each other during this busy bee season, and therefore talk about the mistakes that you made or some problems that you might have seen, and you can talk through that to see if it's a real problem or something that shouldn't be too much of a concern. So definitely continue those mentor-mentee relationships. A third thing that I will really implore you, if you can, is not to quit your monthly club meetings. We have 78 chapters. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. It's hard to keep count of how many chapters we have of beekeepers in North Carolina. But there are 78 or so chapters in the state that meet once a month. And that type of social interaction, I think, there's a reason why we are the biggest and most vibrant state community of beekeepers, because we have so many meetings and we have so many clubs. It would be a real shame if by this social distancing we shut down those regular meetings so that we get out of the habit of going every single month and talking with each other. So using Zoom or other similar platforms such as this is something that is available, and something hopefully that we'll talk with Paul Newbold later in the next segment. But it's definitely something that you can harness, and I would encourage you to make every effort to not just encourage the leadership of your local club to embrace these, but to make sure that you attend them so that there's a reason for them to do that. So I think that making sure that you have that continuation of the monthly meetings, or at least regular meetings with your club, is really, really important. I should say that it may take a little bit of getting used to of having virtual meetings rather than in-person meetings. And it's universally true that it's always difficult to come up with good quality content every single month to talk about bees and beekeeping with your entire membership. And so definitely look at the resources that we have at NC State. We have a free YouTube channel that many of you may or may not know about, where we have recorded videos that you can show through screen sharing, just like I'm doing right now, so that you can all watch the same content. I'm recording these apiculture online webinars so that if not a lot of your membership are able to make these things live, you may be able to watch them, or at least segments of them, during your monthly meetings. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to draw in on content that's out there and through NC State Apiculture. We also have an online speaker request form. So because we get so many requests for meetings, we certainly can't make them all. But what we try and say, our philosophy is that we always provide something to every request. So obviously the best thing would be for one of our members to come out to the club and give an in-person talk. That's very constraining and right now impossible. We're prohibited from doing that. So if we can't do an in-person talk, we always try and set up one of these remote talks. And then if that's not possible, we always have our YouTube channel. So I think go ahead and continue to make those request forms on our website. If you have an open month and we can do one of our live remote presentations through Zoom, we can work that out as well. At this time is catch up on your learning on beekeeping. You know, most of the time we say, oh, we're going to read that book or take that online course or do something during the winter. And then winter comes and goes before you're actually able to do that. So catch up on your reading. If there's that beekeeping book that you've always wanted to read, try and do that as best you can. Try to catch up on your reading. We also, as I just alluded to, have these online courses through our beekeeper education engagement system at both the beginner level as well as the advanced level. So that is another thing that you can do to train yourself on bees and beekeeping. We have 3 different tracks, those dealing with biology, bee management, and then the honeybee industry. And so they're all a la carte, and you can pick and choose the types of classes that you want to take and when, and go at your own pace. So one final thing that you can do during this time of social distancing is plan ahead for the fall. Believe it or not, this will end. We are going to be allowed out of our homes at some point. Of course, we just don't know when or where. And again, the bees and all of nature is just forging ahead in spite of us not being out there, right? So we need to be planning ahead for what's going to happen later on in the season. And just like an early spring has led to early swarming and beekeeping problems for us as beekeepers, it also means that they're going to have 1 or 2 more brood cycles within the year, which means that the population of varroa mites is very likely going to be growing higher than they normally might in previous years. And so I think it's really important to stay on top of the mite loads within your colonies. Whenever you go out, try and monitor for the prevalence of the mites by doing a sugar shake, as is pictured here, and really trying to make sure that you're controlling, or at least keeping on top of the prevalence of varroa mites, because anything that starts to get above 3 to 5% later on in the fall can really spell doom for bees going into winter. So just plan ahead accordingly with your mite monitoring and your mite control plans, whatever they might be, so that we can put it on the speaker view so that we can have a quick interview here with Paul Newbold. Paul, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, I guess I'm on then.
There we
There you
go.
go.
All right, great. I was just, the Zoom procedure we're using tonight is great. Matter of fact, our board meeting that we had in early April, we experimented with this, and we had all 20 members of the board were able to get together and discuss things that are going on at the same time. So it was really, it's a game changer. When we can't get together, it's nice that we can do something like this. And the good thing is the NCSBA does have a Zoom program. It will accommodate up to 100 people. The only negative thing is we can only do one at a time. So it's one where if you would like to use it, we will connect you with it and get it where you can do it. We just have to schedule it in advance.
So I was going to ask you about that, Paul.
Night.
So the NCSBA, as the umbrella state association, has a license now for all of the clubs to use, or individuals, or how do you envision that's going to work?
We will pass it on to the individual chapters and let them do a chapter meeting. Now, Zoom is free if you only limit it to 40 minutes. So a chapter can go on and pick up their own free Zoom in a 40-minute program, but we have it where it can go beyond that. So if you're doing a presentation, you can go beyond that without logging off and logging back in.
Right. And I think some have already done that, but I think it's also great that the NCSBA has invested in a license, just like NC State has, that we're using the license right now for extension and for this. So I think that's really great.
I think tomorrow night Mecklenburg is going to be setting up a Zoom meeting, so they'll be using it.
Excellent. So I also understand that the summer conference that's typically scheduled the weekend after the 4th of July has been canceled this year, and I think rightly so, because things are so up in the air. What were the discussions that the board had to lead to that, and what is your plan going forward to either make up with that or to get back on track?
Well, what we looked at and we talked about it, and I gave every member of the board a chance to speak up about it, it was the fact that the university, we were going to be over at Blue Ridge Community College. The colleges have shut down with no guarantee they would be open. The speakers that we had scheduled had said they weren't going to travel and would not commit to us. And I think if we went to the membership and said, how many of you would plan to attend, and everyone would kind of halfway rate, well, maybe. So getting vendors to show up to accommodate the maybes is kind of impossible. So we went ahead and discussed it amongst us, and we decided to go ahead and cancel. Since then, everyone, even EAS that was meeting up in Maine, they've canceled theirs. So yeah. It's pretty much the rule of thumb for the summer.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that's right. We need to abide by that. In fact, probably wouldn't be allowed to hold something like that right now, because the summer conferences have been getting 500, 600, even 700 people, and so those are just prohibited right now. But because so much of the planning goes into it, I think that's exactly right, and too bad. But at least we're all in the same boat when it comes to that. I know that at that summer meeting, as is pretty standard, there's a business meeting associated with every NCSBA conference where the rank and file can have their say about certain issues and importantly, to vote on important issues. And I know that the NCSBA has some constitution changes or changes, proposed changes to the NCSBA constitution and bylaws, where that needs to be voted upon according to the bylaws. How are you going to go about doing that this summer to try and account for this not having a meeting?
Luckily, we started the process last year by putting an amendment to the Constitution where we can do voting and all of this by using the electronic process. So we've got that now in place. And matter of fact, of the 4,500 members we only have about 500 who haven't agreed to it yet, and we're going to send them another email and try to get them to go along with us. But yeah, we have a few things. Our articles of incorporation from a C3 to a C5, little minor things like that. There's a lot of cleanup to the Constitution that we need to do. We've got a lot of items that we want to kind of narrow it down to what's really important. We have so many things that were made into it years ago that are like, we have programs that are there that should be listed as a program and not part of the Constitution. So it's more of a cleanup process. It's streamlining it and getting it ready for the future.
Well, that's great. That's good.
Also, we'll be electing officers. So that happens every year. We've got some new regional directors we're going to be bringing on, and some of the officers will be up for election.
Well, so why don't you explain that a little bit about the kind of the structure of the NCSBA and how it works from the board of directors to the regional directors and then the county chapters.
Yeah, we have our regional directors. There's 12 of them, and they are really the in-between. They are the voice of the chapters. And we've been working in the last couple of years really to get more and more exposure of our regional directors visiting the chapters and coming back to the board meetings and working through us to let us know what's going on out there. Our normal officers, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and all that. And like I say, there are 20 voting members when you include the regional directors. So we meet multiple times during the year and discuss business, and our regional directors are the ones that are bringing in what's happening in the chapters and where the interest in the chapters are and what we can do to help them.
That's great.
We've got
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we're working on several programs like our 4-H that was really one of our highlight programs for the year, and we're hoping with spring coming and maybe some of the easing of the things that are happening in the state, we can get back and get that 4-H program going again.
Yeah, so explain that a little more. So I know that there are already a lot of clubs that are doing this, but you're going above and beyond that by really trying to incentivize that of local clubs working with 4-H.
Yeah, we're looking at the extension service, the 4-H representatives there, getting with the chapters. So it's a combination of the chapters and extension, putting together any kind of a program. I feel that 4-H is our future beekeepers. So anything that they can put together, we have the resources where we'll supply up to $500 per chapter if they'll work with the extension and get these kids involved in beekeeping. It can be anything from a weekend to week-long, or we're open to any kind of ideas.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it also gives a kind of a rallying point around local clubs, gives them something tangible that they can work towards, where it's not necessarily just about beekeeping, but it's about furthering the local community, which I think is really fantastic. You have other programs like the Born and Bred program, where you're having people, teaching them how to raise queens. There's, of course, the Master Beekeeper program, which is the largest in the nation, if not the world. There's plenty of other things that you have going on as well.
We're going to be, and this is something that we're going to be rolling out here very shortly, is our Certified Honey Producer program. We've got an article that we're going to be trying to get into a few magazines and local newspapers. So we're really going to be promoting the certified honey producers. So the little stickers and all that, we're going to make it mean something before this is over with. So we're really, Ed Spears, our new chairman of that, and we've got a lot of ideas that we're going to be pushing out.
That's really great. Well, I think it's very fitting of the largest beekeeper association in the nation, and the largest concentration of beekeepers, certainly per capita, anywhere that we have. I think it really speaks to the overarching structure that the NCSBA has been providing for years. So,
and you had mentioned like the Born and Bred, we had to cancel our workshop for May 9th because of what's going on in the world.
Yep.
But we still have several chapters that will still be trying to do a born and bred chapter program for raising queens within the chapter. And we're still promoting that. And that's another one where the revenue and the money that we have in the, we will help fund the chapters that will work this program.
Well, that's really excellent. Any final thoughts as to the future direction of the NCSBA, you know, going forward?
Yeah, we're working years into the future, because with trying to get quality speakers and set up places or that can accommodate us, we're having to plan way ahead. So we're going to be back in New Bern. That's been a very good conference center for us the first weekend in March. We're finalizing. We're looking at 2 things for a couple of different places for next summer. And even we've talked and kind of hashed around flip-flopping, where we've done the spring in the east and the summer in the west, and maybe doing something there. We're constantly talking. We're trying to get our speakers scheduled in advance. We're looking at workshops, even some of this more that we can take back to the chapter. We had some really good workshops in the spring. I've got we had around 500 people attend. We had 147 people that responded to the survey, and we went through and we looked and read every one of them. So believe me, when you do them, we read them.
That's great. Well, thank you, Paul, for serving as president these many years and showing great leadership, and agreeing to be our interview guest tonight on our inaugural session here. So I think it's worked out really well.
Glad you had me. I'm thrilled to be here.
We're entering into the question and answer session here. So again, I think it's going to be impossible to be able to get to everybody's questions. So apologies if we're unable to get to yours. I have seen that some of our other attendees have been answering the questions as they've been rolling in. So I appreciate that, and the sense of community that we have in this. But continue to rather than talking, making our mics active and talking over each other, which I think can get pretty confusing, especially with so many attendees that we have tonight. Go ahead and use your chat box so that we don't necessarily talk over each other. And then if you could, Sharon and Aaron, please help me curate some of these chats in case I miss any here. They've been scrolling in, so I'm not going to scroll too far back.
I think Sharon has some that she's been collecting along the way for
Okay,
you.
yeah, please do. Go ahead, Sharon.
Right. This is from Jim, and he said, how long can a section of brood live and be viable between removal from a renegade hive before being placed in a new viable hive?
Yeah, so if you're going to do that checkerboarding or some other movement of a frame of brood to another, it depends on the frame. So if you have eggs and young larvae, they're very, very sensitive to drying out and to temperature. And so you can keep it out for several minutes, say 5 minutes or so, as long as it's not in direct sun and as long as it's not really cold or super, super hot outside. It should be fine for, you know, the order of 5, maybe 10 minutes. So if you're just moving a frame from one side of your yard to the other, that should be fine. If you have to get in your truck and drive a couple miles down the road to get to another apiary, for example, then to transport it, you want to put it in the dark so that it's out of the sunlight, and ideally put some wet paper towels, not dripping wet, but damp paper towels to keep the humidity up. And that's the best way to transport young open brood, eggs and young larvae. Cap brood, that is pupae, are a lot more forgiving. And so those you can keep out of the hive, again, as long as it's not super hot or super cold, like in the 50s or something like that. You should be able to keep it outside of the hive for 10, 20, even 30 minutes to be able to transport it to another colony. So it depends on the type of frame, but you don't want to do it too long because they like it that nice and cozy 95 degrees. And so keeping it out more than half an hour can start to become a problem. Is there another question there, Sharon?
Yeah, this is from Michael. How long can a queen cell last outside of the mother hive?
That's a good question. And again, it kind of depends on the age. So it takes 16 days for that queen cell to fully mature. Before it's capped, that is before it reaches the pupal phase, if it's in the larval phase, it can't really survive outside of the hive at all. Now, once you have ripe or very mature queen cells, say, 13, 14 days old, again, they emerge at day 16, you can take those out of the hive, and as long as you keep them at brood nest temperature, again, 95 degrees, in an incubator or in one of those egg incubators or someplace warm that's very stable at that temperature, then you can keep them out of the hive for 4 days. But it has to be very precise in order to keep them viable. Now, if you're transporting a cell from one apiary to another apiary, again, kind of like what I was talking before, if you have a hot bottle of water that's sitting in some sort of carrying device or an igloo container or something like that, that will keep them warm as long as you place the cells on a cushion or something where they don't get damaged or jostled as they're being moved. So if you treat them very delicately and keep them warm, you can keep them out of the hive for half an hour or something like that to run to another yard. So to follow up on that, here's a question from Terry. What is the ideal temperature in Fahrenheit for a queen incubator? And it's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. It's 34 degrees Celsius, but it's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Any other from the backlog, Sharon?
Not as much from the backlog. I don't know if you saw this one. Any advice for a new beekeeper that has entered during the COVID-19 crisis and they can join a chapter due to the shutdown?
Yeah, so I think my hope is that you will still be able to join a chapter during the shutdown. So my number 1, number 2, and number 3 advice for all new beekeepers is to join the local chapters. Beekeeping can be fairly straightforward, but it can still be a challenge when you're doing it in a vacuum. But it makes it all the easier when you realize that you can join a community of people that have already kind of been through it, and it just makes it all the easier to do. So during this time, I get that it's a real challenge, and the timing may not be appropriate, but hopefully we'll still be able to maintain that sense of community and to be able to join, albeit remotely. I think the one real difficulty of starting bees right now is physically having them, not so much about learning about them or talking with other people. It's about the practicality of it. And so that may be a challenge that can't be surmounted unless you haven't gotten your bees yet, and you can put that off until next season, where you'll have another year under your belt of learning about bees and beekeeping and being a little patient. But if you already have them on order or they've already arrived, just do the best that you can do and realize that when it comes to bees and beekeeping, they're just going to do their thing. You can do all sorts of stuff and they will just compensate for it. The bees are, they're only semi-domesticated, right? We're helping them live in the wild. They don't need us necessarily, but we can certainly help them. And in other ways, they can really use our help. So just realize that they can be very forgiving in a lot of ways, and also realize that you can do everything right, but still things go wrong. So I think that especially if you're kind of learning beekeeping in a vacuum, and things don't go well and the bees, don't make it till next year, don't blame yourself. just realize that this is not as straightforward, and you can do everything right. It's not always because of you. The bees are facing a lot of challenges just on their own. And so you can do everything right, but still things go wrong. So don't get too discouraged. Just try to learn from what you had done before and try to improve upon that. And I think that's something that keeps all of us going, because the bees are really wonderful creatures to work with. And it's very humbling for the beekeeper to realize that it's not just up to us.
I don't know if you want to go ahead and look at the chat. I've got questions taken care of all the way up to Mary Garrison,
Okay.
where she is, if you want me to read it, I can.
Yeah, please do. There's just so many. It's hard to scan through them
Sure.
all, which is just awesome. Thanks, guys.
My 2 deep boxes are pretty full, and I have added a super, but they haven't started drawing it out yet. It's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, so I think a couple things there about drawing out new foundation. So, wax is extremely expensive for them to make, right? It takes 9 pounds of honey for them to make 1 pound of wax. So, it's something that they're very hesitant to do unless there's a real need for it. So if they don't have any space, they're very well conditioned to make new comb. If there's a lot of nectar coming in, so they need to store that nectar to make honey, they're very poised to make new comb. But outside of that, they're pretty reluctant to do so. So it's possible that the conditions just aren't quite right, and so you need to be a little more patient. And so, or it could be that they also have preference for the type of foundation to draw the comb on. They tend to prefer the wax foundation more than they do the plastic foundation. But again, if there's a real need, they will end up doing it. So I think be a little more patient. If you want to really kind of spur them to do it, give them no choice, which is that whole checkerboarding idea where you remove combs from right in the heart of the brood nest where they absolutely need comb, and you put in a foundation into that space. They're going to draw it out because it's right in the heart of their entire brood nest, and they'll have no other choice but to draw it out. So there's different ways that you can do it. But if they're honey supers, I would just leave them on top and let them get to it when they need to. They know when they'll need it.
Okay. From Lindsay, I split a strong hive and they swarmed anyway, but I caught the swarm. So I have 2 new and I believe virgin colonies.
Okay.
Despite the fact that we are coming into the main flow, should I feed frequently to help them draw out comb?
I think the idea is on new colonies, when they're drawing out new comb, providing them with sugar syrup, which is a supplemental nectar source, so that they always have something for that energy to make the wax, right? I think that's the idea of providing sugar syrup. During the nectar flow, they will by and large ignore that supplemental syrup because it would much rather go get nectar rather than syrup. But during the night or during rainy weather, they can tap into that. So I think it's probably a good way to hedge your bets and make sure that they provide it. However, if you go back and you check on it and they haven't taken any of it down and it might even be starting to ferment or other problems, then just take it off because they don't need it. That's just their way of saying thanks but no thanks. So provide it, and if they're using it to draw out the comb, great. But if they're not, then they don't need it. I think it's really important, though, to distinguish between new splits or new swarms or new packages, new colonies that are drawing out new comb for the first time versus established colonies where you're putting on honey supers and trying to draw that out, because those colonies, you don't want to be diluting the natural nectar with your supplemental nectar, right? So for established colonies where you're drawing out honey supers rather than brood frames, they probably are large enough where they don't need the supplemental feed. and you also don't want to be providing it because you don't want to be ruining your own honey crop. So I think it also depends on not just the state of the environment, but the state of the colony as to when you might want to feed that supplementally.
The next one is from Deborah, and she said, as a new beekeeper, I'm getting a lot of burr comb at the bottom of my frames. What
Yeah.
causes that? And does it need to be removed?
So, burr comb or connecting comb is different from the propolis, which is the sticky resinous stuff that they use like caulking to seal all of the cracks in the hive. The burr comb is where they kind of build it in addition to or in between, the different frames. They're not always, perfect. So it depends on how hygienic and clean you want to be. It's not really much of a problem until it starts to build up so much that you can't use your hive tool to be able to pry them apart anymore, right? So there's kind of a balance. A lot of beekeepers like to scrape that excess comb away. But if you do it too much, then a lot of the times they just build it back. And so that's kind of wasted energy for them. So I think just do it according to how much or how little, that you feel like they need. But they're always going to kind of build the inside envelope of the hive with the wax and the propolis to be able to make sure that it's air and water tight for their needs. So I think it's not too much of a problem until you have difficulty actually moving the frames, or you might be introducing the possibility of bees getting smushed in between the burr comb and your frames as you're moving things around. So, scrape accordingly. Here's a question about how long before a queen emerges that she starts laying. So that's a really great question. So we already talked about how it takes 16 days for a queen to fully develop from egg to hatching out. But once she hatches out, then it still takes a good 2 weeks or more for her to start laying. And that's because if the colony is just requeening naturally, they usually make several queen cells, about a dozen, and then those sister queens have to fight it out to the death until there's just one victor. And then that one victor takes over the colony. When she's about a week old, she flies from the hive and then mates with drones from other hives. And actually, there's a video on the PowerPoint here that actually shows it on the right-hand side of honeybee mating. And so as that process happens, the queen mates with a couple dozen drones and then stores the sperm, and then her egg-laying machinery and her ovaries need to be kicked into gear. And so that takes a lot of time as well. So overall, it takes a good 2, sometimes even 3 weeks for that whole process to manifest, and then she starts laying fertilized eggs. It then takes another 10 days or so to verify that those eggs that she's laying are indeed fertilized. So the process of requeening can take quite a period of time, which is why finding a already mated queen to introduce to your hive can shorten that hiatus, that brood hiatus, and make it a lot more effective for the beekeeper. But again, the bees have been doing this for a long time, and so they have it worked out.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Okay, we'll take one, maybe 2 more questions.
From Peter, when I replace old frames, can I leave a strip of comb at the top as a starter strip? And does a starter strip take much longer to dry out than as compared to a foundation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's another way that you can start a comb, right? The frame is, the bees don't need that. We just have that to give the comb structural rigidity, right? And so when it's encased in the entire frame, we can move it around so that it's not nearly as delicate, and we don't damage it so that they don't have to rebuild it, right? Now, a lot of the frames, you can place in an entire sheet of either plastic or wax foundation so that they can draw the whole thing out. But the starter strip is where there's a small little band of wax on the top, and they fill out the frame from the top down as they would naturally. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And it works very, very well. It just takes them a little longer, and sometimes it can be a little more irregular because of that. Because the foundation, not only is it there to serve as a template, it actually can provide them with a head start so they don't have to synthesize quite as much wax. So with the starter strip, they have to build more wax than they would with a full sheet of foundation, but there's nothing wrong with it, and they will adapt to that just fine as well. So just realize, be a little more patient, I think, if you're using starter strips versus full foundation.
You want to take one more?
Sure, I'll take this last one here about a 2-year-old queen
Right.
that's only laying drones. So this is what beekeepers call a drone layer. Beekeepers are they're just ingenious and very inventive, but they really are not very, they don't have a lot of names that they give to things. They're not very inventive. But the drone layers are those where they run out of sperm. So during that mating process, they'll store, 5 to 7 million sperm from all of their mates, and they'll never mate again. And so that's the only time that they get inseminated. And so as they're laying over their 2-year lifetime, they're using up that store. And so eventually they will run out. And so queens will not realize that they've run out of sperm, and so they'll keep laying eggs, but they can't get fertilized. Unfertilized eggs develop into drones, whereas fertilized eggs develop into workers. So the queen just keeps on laying, thinking that she's making workers, but she's really not. And so this is where we can really help the bees by seeing that, because for some reason, the workers don't really replace her readily or every time that the queen turns into a drone layer. So that's where you can see that, and you can replace her yourself by getting a newly mated queen and replacing that drone laying queen so that the colony can keep going and persisting. Of course, they'll have a turnover from, worker offspring from the old queen to the new queen, but that normally takes place when there's a change in who the queen is running the colony. So I think I'm going to leave it there. This has been really successful, except for those photo bombers that came in. Again, my profuse apologies for them. But we're going to try and do this every other week. We felt like every week might have been too much. Every month might have been too far between. So we're going to try a bi-weekly seminar here or webinar that we're going to try. So save the date for 2 weeks from now, which is going to be May 6th. We're going to have it at the same time. Sharon, I forgot to get the link to your survey that we can put in here. Or Aaron, if you have it, put it into the chat. I will send another invite. I will send another reminder email. If you're not on our Wolfpack Waggle email list, please visit our website and send us an email, and we'll be happy to do that. We'll also send it out through the county chapters as well as the extension agents. So hopefully you'll be able to hear about it. Or you can just visit our webinar page, which is on the bottom here, where we're going to be posting the Zoom link and other information. Our interviewees that we're going to have for 2 weeks is going to be several of the NCDA inspectors. I already have 2 or 3 of them lined up, and I hope that all 6 may be able to join us. And then the timely topic that we'll talk about is queen rearing and going over the biology and the practicality of how to raise your own queens, because this is the perfect time of year to do that.